Dear colleagues, first I'd like to sincerely apologize for not being able to attend this important conference in person due to prior commitments. Nevertheless, I am very pleased to share my thoughts with you in this way, and I deeply appreciate the opportunity to speak at this esteemed event. The title of my presentation is Cultural Resilience in a Post-Digital World Towards Collective Transformative Learning and Education for the Anthropocene, as you can already see on the slide. In this talk, I will explore the role of cultural resilience in our increasingly post-digital world and discuss how we can shape collective transformative learning processes that respond to the challenges of the Anthropocene. In the last decade, sustainability-related issues have become increasingly pressing, not only in the public consciousness but also in the professional awareness of scientific disciplines. In educational science, the examination of ecological issues and dynamics has been important for decades and has differentiated itself as its own sub-discipline, Education for Sustainable Development, or ESD in short. As an educational discourse on the emerging paradigm sustainability, ESD enabled a dense and indeed contested field of theories, semantics, and methodological approaches. The following considerations are an attempt to allow sustainability-related questions and thinking to become effective as a concern of general educational theory. In accordance with critical developments in the ESD discourse, our question is firstly whether sustainability-related thinking could and should provide a structural element of educational theory itself, it is in the sense of a change in our ideas and concepts of and about education at the very center of educational theory. And when I say educational theory, I have to confess that I'm referring to the German, very difficult to translate word Bildung. So it's Bildungstheorie, educational theory. This endeavor will secondly be unfolded within the context of a post-digital culture. Digitalization, in the comprehensive sense applied here, contributes to the current reshaping of the material, energetic and infrastructural, but also the sensorical, communicational, social and cultural face of the planet. It is a profoundly cultural process, especially if one acknowledges that the notion of culture cannot be separated from its material tiers. The diagnosis of the Anthropocene calls for much more than global consciousness, namely a planetary sense and sensitization. The ways in which digital culture has contributed to notions of an interconnected world are crucial in this regard. Will the Earth be considered as a set of commodifiable resources for digitally globalized economies, as Shoshana Zuboff wrote in 2019, or as a space signified by curatorial care and critical data practices, as Jennifer Gabris thinks about since many years? In short, which worldviews and whose cultural values will be embedded in the digital technologies that shape our futures? In the context of the Anthropocene, where human activities have become a dominant force shaping Earth ecosystems, there is an urgent need to reimagine our relationship with technology and the environment. And it was Gayatri Spivak who committed to this endeavor as early as in 1979, I think. This leads to a third element of my talk, namely traditional and indigenous knowledge systems, which have sustained communities and ecosystems for millennia, offer profound insights for this reimagining. These knowledge systems embody cultural resilience, the ability to maintain cultural integrity while adapting to changing conditions. They also provide a framework for eco-critical computing, an approach that considers the ecological impacts and implications of our digital technologies. By discussing indigenous understandings of technology and its role in the Anthropocene, I hope to find valuable insights to both cultural and ecological challenges of educational theory. These perspectives also provide a foundation for developing educational approaches that transcend the current dominant paradigms, which tend to be somewhat narrow, individualistic, and instrumental in the mainstream of educational practice and administration. This integration is crucial for Anthropocene education, as it allows us to move beyond the nature-culture divide that has often characterized Western thinking in particular, towards a more interconnected, responsible relationship with our planet. In the following, I aim to synthesize the aforementioned three key elements: educational theory, digitality, and indigenous thinking. Their interconnectedness will be demonstrated through a specific educational interpretation of resilience, a concept we have been developing at the UNESCO Chair in Digital Culture and Arts and Education in recent years. Our approach reimagines education in the sense of Bildung as collective transformative learning processes. These processes unfold within an ecosystem of human, non-human, natural, and technological actors, reflecting an understanding of the educational environment. So first part, resilience as future ability. Resilience is the capacity for robust adaptability in the face of challenges, crisis, and change. It extends far beyond the simplistic notion of individuals heroically withstanding adversity. While many interpretations of resilience, especially in educational contexts, root themselves in individualism and functionalism, this view is limited. Recent works in sociology, cultural studies, geography, and art studies reveal resilience theories' potential to encompass social, cultural, and material aspects of life. In this broader perspective, resilience is not about maintaining the status quo, not so much. Instead, it implies future ability, the capacity to not only adapt to future conditions, but to proactively shape them in ways that prioritize collective well-being and sustainability. Rather than seeing the future as an external force that must be passively accepted, future ability is about mutual agency, a collaborative capacity to envision and create livable futures. Hando and Hidaka, 2010, introduced the concept of futurable mutualism, which emphasizes cooperative engagement in inevitable socio-ecological transformations. This model stresses that future conditions are never singular or predetermined, but are negotiated through collective action. Saeju 2024 extends this by emphasizing that future ability entails prioritizing future generations in present decision making. This vision of future ability moves beyond resilience as mere survival, pointing to a more active, participatory process of future building. It highlights that resilience is not a static state, but an ongoing relational process of cultural, ecological, and social care, as well as intergenerational negotiation. In this sense, future ability becomes a practice of cultural care, an act of safeguarding continuity while fostering adaptive transformations necessary for thriving in an uncertain world. It asks not only how we adapt to future conditions, but also what kind of futures we are collectively responsible for shaping. These processes of care brings the dialectic between the continuity and change into sharper focus, as communities must negotiate which elements of their cultural, ecological, and social systems are preserved and which are reimagined. Sustainability should consequently be understood as the inseparable interrelationship between, on the one hand, cultural constructions of a human future, culture as the foundation for the continuation of life, and on the other hand, cultural constructions of inheriting ways and means to relate to the world, culture itself, life as the foundation for the continuation of culture. From such perspective, education can hardly be understood apart from culture. And this is what Klaus Mollenhauer, a famous German educational theorist, showed as early as 1983. It is rather merely a name for that education, is rather merely a name for that particular complex of cultural institutions and dispositions, which takes care of futurability. If we understand sustainability as a cultural matter, as a matter of enabling, negotiating and shaping futurability, then we have to acknowledge that it is inherent in the very thought of education. From here we can trace the ways in which sustainability could be understood as an inherent structural element of education and try to implement it at the core of educational theory itself. I have not a finalized theory to present today, but I'd like to draw on a particular understanding of a concept of cultural resilience as a promising theoretical framework towards such endeavor. Katrina Brown, a British scholar, well known for her work on environmental change, development and resilience, developed a theoretical framework of resilience based on her analysis of ethnographic case studies. She identifies three interrelated core elements: rootedness, resourcefulness, and resistance, which are crucial for successful resilience processes. Rootedness is, as she writes, about place, identity, and belonging. And it reflects the interconnectedness of people, cultures, and places, grounded in a sense of belonging that both constrains and supports capacities for adaptation and transformation. Importantly, rootedness is not synonymous with static attachment to place or tradition, but it is inherently adaptive and responsive. For communities, especially those in post-migrant or diasporic conditions, rootedness forms the basis for a responsible engagement with both material and cultural environments. I propose to understand rootedness as a dynamic relation of care, wherein responsibility arises not only from ownership but from relationality. The act of nurturing and safeguarding both culture and environment for future generations. Resourcefulness, second term, is about connecting, as Brown writes, I quote, pre-existing assets and capacities within a community or associated with a place with external streams of resources. Resourcefulness, she writes, in this respect links to innovation, social learning and social capital, all of which have been identified as key components of adaptive capacity and resilience, quotation end. Resourcefulness involves harnessing pre-existing assets and capacities, but also reimagining and creatively rearranging and reworking existing social, cultural and material networks. Drawing on Karen Barat's notion of rearrangements, rearticulations and reworkings from 2007, this element of resourcefulness highlights the potential to liberate the future from present constraints by continuously reimagining how cultural and material elements interact. Finally, resistance becomes essential for maintaining cultural agency and ensuring that resilience is not reduced to passive adaptation. Classical modes of resilience often downplay resistance in favor of pragmatic flexibility, yet Brown rightly highlights the importance of resistance as a mode of action, one that enables individuals and communities to build alternatives and challenge external pressures. Resistance in this context involves the creation of resistive structures, such as networked initiatives and associations, which provide spaces for collective knowledge building, negotiation of viewpoints, and assertive action. Rather than opposing change, resistance serves as a strategic negotiation of what must be preserved and defended in the face of external pressures, while also allowing for adaptive change where necessary. The following example will illustrate how, in particular, indigenous approaches to technology naturally weave together cultural resilience, ecological sustainability, and critical engagement with the digital realm. This example highlights how cultural practices can be both adaptive and resistant, offering valuable lessons for navigating the complexities of the Anthropocene. The game Never Alone, Kizima Inyechunya, is a compelling case which exemplifies how indigenous storytelling and knowledge systems are integrated into digital formats, creating a space where traditional narratives, ecological consciousness, and digital innovation intersect, and fostering a form of planetary dissensus that challenges dominant technological paradigms while cultivating alternative futures. At its core, it is a jump-and-run game enriched with puzzle elements, in which the Inupiaq girl Nuna, together with her snow fox, completes tasks and adventures resulting from an irregular weather phenomenon, a never-ending snowstorm, which must be ended in interaction with natural forces and nature spirits. Nuna and her fox feature different options for action, each of which can be controlled alternatively by the players. Both characters cooperate throughout, meaning human and non-human actors are in an active relationship with each other from the very beginning of the game, and the player is thus not located in one but in two virtual bodies. Within the levels, different non-player characters appear, including a polar bear as a threatening natural element, but also nature spirits as helping or ambivalent figures. The aesthetics of both narrative and control-related game elements are largely based on stories and art forms of indigenous North American cultures, including bone carving aesthetics and leather engraving. Instead of the genre-typical award system in which scores and/or skills are awarded for passing a level, the players in Never Alone are rewarded with indigenous knowledge, stories, and explanations of traditional aspects of the culture of the Inupiaq. The focus here is on eyewitness videos of cultural ambassadors, relatives, and chiefs of the Inupiaq, often incorporating documentary footage. The videos do not necessarily have to be watched, but they can also be skipped. Likewise, the knowledge imparted is not a prerequisite for the further course of the game. The game is not an educational game, it is an interwoven storytelling. The insight into the intangible cultural heritage of the Inupiaq is far-reaching, from reports of experiences about everyday activities to the thematization of values and cosmological modes of relating. Resilience in the sense of cultural framings of a relationship with nature that is designed for sustainability and care is obviously the subject of the game, and with regard to the knowledge imparted, at least to some extent, potentially also an effect of the game. However, this aspect is intricately tied to the game's very existence, including the social, cultural, economic, and organizational conditions that shaped its development. The process of negotiating and organizing the interviews for the video sequences, as well as the research into the game's narrative, artifacts, practices, and artistic forms, goes far beyond typical game design. Never Alone centers on inherited traditional content, which requires a deep and diverse understanding of forms that have been eroded by colonization and modernization. What truly sets the game apart, though, is that its production was itself a collective economic project from the start. The developer Upper One Games was founded by a for-profit arm of the Cook Inlet Tribal Council in Canada, making it, by its own admission, the first indigenously owned game company in the United States. In fact, a large number of elders, cultural ambassadors, traditional storytellers, historians, and youth from various Alaskan communities collaborated with a team of game developers from different nations. Not only the main narrative of the game, but also the form of transmission of the story follows the Inupiat culture and values. The chosen story, Kunuuksayayuka, written by Robert Cleveland, interweaves ecological, spiritual, and resilience-related elements. Now, in the Inupiat tradition, stories are inherited by the eldest child in the family line. Robert Cleveland died many years ago, so the design team tracked down his eldest child, Minnie Ali Jack Gray, and received her permission to use and edit the story in the video game. As Alsbach 2017 writes. In analysis, the process of collective game design appears as a curatorial process in a double sense. Firstly, the cultural selection of what is to be preserved for the game represents a practice of collective care for bodies of knowledge, traditions, and values that are threatened by oblivion. Secondly, the game is a strictly relational entity by nature. It is not separable as an artifact from its context, but inherits an idea of embeddedness from the Inupiat culture. The game as a digital object stands in conjunctions that have to be understood as a current version of Inupiat narrative practice. As Michelle Lee Brown states, I quote, "This particular emergence of the story within Never Alone is new. It is one more step in a longer series of art evolutions for the Inupiat from scrimshaw carvings on whalebone to ink and paper illustrations, oral stories, to written, then printed books, now digital media." Thus, the medial transition process into the digitally networked sphere is by no means a radical innovation, but rather a continuation of cultural forms of transmission that have long existed in the supposedly oral but actually medially complex cultures of the First Nations of North America. The game reveals itself as both the object and context of a sustaining transformation. As we have noticed, the act of sustaining is precisely not a static preservation. This sustaining process is deeply intertwined with the cosmology that shapes the game's narrative. As Donna Haraway wrote in 2016, Never Alone is by no means merely an offer for the indigenous communities from which it originates. It conveys the embedded traditional ecological knowledge to all who are willing to and able to perceive it as such. Never Alone illustrates, and now I will discuss the findings of this analysis, illustrates a unique way of relating, which I earlier proposed as an educational concept under the conditions of the Anthropocene. The process of passing down intangible cultural heritage, building shared knowledge, separate from exoticized Western views of one's own traditions, takes the form of shared knowledge systems. These systems connect with the small independent game design company. This project is defined by collective distributed learning and education, revisiting and rethinking forgotten parts of one's culture, translating knowledge across generations and media, organizing networks of people, and finally turning these cultural processes into an economic structure, such as the CITAC's Tribal Council's self-administrative institution. The combination of resistance against colonial erasure and its long-term impacts on indigenous economic opportunities. Secondly, rootedness, preserving and translating traditions. And thirdly, resourcefulness, reconfiguring cultural, organizational, and economic resources, is part of a process of distributed transformational learning. This process is tied to the emergence of new structures of interrelation within social entanglements, meaning networks. So I come to my conclusion. Understanding media as actants in human, non-human networked entanglements is one approach, to reframe educational processes as fundamentally relational and distributed, rather than something that happens solely inside the individual or inside the brain. This shift echoes those contemporary developments in at least German educational theory, which emphasize the importance of relationality, the co-constitutions of the subject through engagement with the world, and the transformation of self and society through entangled, networked learning processes. In the context of the Anthropocene, education, in the sense of Bildung, as mentioned, must be reconceptualized as a process of relational transformation that spans human and non-human actors, media, materialities, and infrastructures. Education, in this view, is not merely about the transmission of knowledge, but about the structural transformations that occur within distributed collective learning networks that include human, material, even spiritual dimensions, as demonstrated in the case of Never Alone. This relational post-digital Bildung highlights the need to move beyond merely using media for educational purposes. Instead, we must shift toward initiating, composing, and directing human, non-human learning collectives, where media and technology are not passive tools, but active participants in the process of cultural resilience and futurability. Such an approach resonates with contemporary educational movements that foreground participatory network practices, from post-colonial archiving practices to citizen science projects to indigenous artificial intelligence, which actively engage with the medialities of resilience and their role in planetary thinking. In sum, education for the Anthropocene must embrace the relational dynamics of cultural care, fostering resilience and adaptability through the interconnections of human and non-human actors, knowledge systems, and media. This approach thinks about education not merely as a process of individual formation, but as a collective, ongoing negotiation of sustainable and just futures, a process that is both rooted in cultural heritage and open to transformative reconfigurations. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to continuing the conversation together.